Oath Before Death. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ghostly Hour. It's your host Bobby, here to tell you a chilling tale. How are you all doing? I hope you're healthy, happy, and successful. Tonight, I have a story titled The Oath Before Death, written by Diaceta. It's a terrifying account of a family destroyed by a bitter act of revenge for a wife's death. So, without further ado, let's get right into the story. The night was deathly quiet. For several days now, no one in the small town of Blackwood Creek had dared to venture outside after the sun went down. A young woman, just getting home from her shift at the diner, walked briskly toward her house. After stepping off the late-night bus, she felt a small measure of relief hearing the distant, rhythmic clang of the old town clock, a sound that meant the volunteer night watch was making its rounds. At least she wasn't entirely alone. It wasn't terribly late, but the recent events in town had forced people to lock their doors tight and schedule the patrols to start earlier. Unfortunately, the comfort she felt was misplaced. The thing they feared was already there. A shrouded figure was there. This time, the corpse, wrapped in a tattered, dirt-stained burial shroud, was staring at one particular house, the house where the tragedy began. A tragedy that would set off a chain of inexplicable events, ultimately wiping out an entire family in Blackwood Creek, West Virginia, in the year 1994. The Blackwood family was the closest thing to royalty the town had ever known. They were a respected, powerful family with old money and deep roots in the region. The patriarch, the late Theodore Blackwood Sr., had built his fortune on coal mining, an enterprise that had been passed down through generations and was trusted by powerful figures across the state. His wife, Eleanor, had managed a successful local textile mill that employed dozens of people. The Blackwood family home was a landmark in Blackwood Creek. It was a large, sprawling Victorian mansion, imposing yet built with a rustic simplicity, dominated by dark wood and stone. They were known as hard workers. One wing of the house had been converted into a workshop for their original jewelry-making business, and another served as a studio for textile design. It had been 10 years since Theodore Sr. passed away at the age of 80, followed by his wife Eleanor a year later. They had 10 children, but only half of them still lived in the area. Only Sarah Blackwood's family remained in the grand ancestral home, while the rest lived far away in bigger cities. They were all successful people, inheriting their parents' business acumen. Some were lawyers, some doctors, and some ran their own companies. In fact, nearly everyone born in Blackwood Creek was related to the Blackwoods in some distant way. Only a few newcomers had settled in the town over the years. Sam Blackwood lived with only his wife, Linda. Their home was a simple, weathered shack with walls of thin clapboard and a hand pump well in the yard. The decent house he had inherited from his father, Theodore Sr., had been sold long ago to pay for his own medical treatments and to cover the debts of his late in-laws. The shack they now lived in had belonged to Linda's parents. Despite his circumstances, Sam was perhaps the most liked of all the Blackwood children. He was humble and actively participated in town events, unlike his siblings who often kept a proud distance from the townsfolk, only appearing for major holidays or family functions. His poverty, however, was often looked down upon by his own family, who were intensely proud of their prestigious name. "Evening," a high school boy called out, knocking on the door of the shack that was a far cry from what one would expect for the son of a tycoon. A few dim, yellow light bulbs hung from the ceiling, supplemented by several oil lamps mounted on the walls for when they couldn't afford the electricity bill. "Well, hello there, Billy." A man with a thin frame and graying hair opened the door with a warm smile, ushering him inside. "Come on in." "Oh, no need, Mr. Sam. I just wanted to bring you this from my mom," Billy said, handing him a covered dish filled with his mother's cooking. "Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, son," Sam said, accepting the dish without hesitation. He quickly transferred the food to his own plate, washed the dish, and handed it back. "I'm sorry, son. I don't have anything to give you in return right now, but once the garden comes in, you tell your mother I'll bring her some fresh vegetables." "Don't you worry about it, Mr. Sam. Mom said if you run out of anything, just let her know. She'll send more over. Thank God we've got plenty." "Thank you, Billy. Please, tell your mother I said thank you." Later that night, Billy's mother told him that Linda had been sick for a week, which was why Sam was spending more time at home, neglecting his odd jobs. "When she gets sick like this, it seems to take forever for her to get better," his mother said with a sigh. "I feel so sorry for them. Her skin's gone all yellow. I think it might be something more serious. Why haven't they taken her to a doctor?" "They have, Mom. Got some medicine too. Hopefully, she'll start feeling better." Billy was a bit indifferent, only able to offer prayers for Sam and Linda. He had no idea that this conversation was the prelude to a tragedy that would soon shake the entire town. A few months later, word spread through Blackwood Creek that the extended Blackwood family had returned for a reunion. Billy's parents even went over to the old mansion to say hello. The gathering was meant to be a nostalgic affair, a chance for the siblings to reconnect with old neighbors and childhood friends. But after the reunion dinner, the atmosphere soured. The sound of shattering glass made several neighbors peek out from their windows. What was happening over at the Blackwood place? "Get out!" Richard, the eldest son, roared, shoving Sam out the front door. "Get out! You're nothing but an embarrassment to this family." "But Rick, please," Sam pleaded, his voice cracking. "If we sell the house, my share could pay for Linda's treatment. She needs proper medical care, Rick. She's really sick." "That's not my problem." Richard slammed the door in his face. Sam stumbled away, walking home alone in the dark, sobbing, while his brothers and sisters continued their lavish party inside. Linda's illness grew worse. Several townspeople had helped Sam take her to the county hospital, but she was sent home after only 3 days because they couldn't afford the mounting bills. Perhaps Sam was right. Maybe the only thing that could save Linda was his inheritance from the Blackwood estate. But that path was a dead end. He had gone to each of his siblings, one by one, only to be met with cold rejection. It was baffling how cruel they could be. Even if they didn't want to sell the ancestral home, they could have at least loaned him the money. But they didn't. A month after the family reunion, Linda passed away. The townspeople helped Sam with the funeral arrangements. Throughout the entire day, Sam was like a statue, unable to accept the reality that the wife he loved so dearly was gone. The community handled the entire funeral procession until it was over, but something was strange. During the burial, none of Sam's 9 siblings were present. Only after the funeral did Sarah, the sister living in the old mansion, come to the cemetery, but she didn't stay long. She turned and fled, her face pale with fear, as if she had seen a ghost. A hushed discussion broke out among the men, gathered at the town's fire station, watching a baseball game on the small television. "Scared? What do you mean scared?" Sarah Blackwood, she's terrified, says she sees Sam standing across the street from the mansion every night, just staring at the house, standing out there for hours, even in the pouring rain. She said his face, well, it's her brother, but she's scared. I don't get it. But didn't she say it's been happening for days now? Yeah. Tonight I saw him myself. And the other Blackwoods who live nearby, they're seeing it too. They say they're scared. They tried to shoo him away, but he just comes back and stands in the same spot. Say there. What made the story even stranger was that they were all seeing Sam in front of their respective houses at the exact same time. Sheriff Brody was bewildered by the reports. It was even more confusing because these were Sam's own relatives, the very people he should have been able to turn to for help. The sheriff and a few deputies decided to pay Sam a visit to see what was going on. "He needs to be taught a lesson," Richard grumbled as they walked. "He's our brother, but this is going too far. He's menacing us." "Now, hold on, Rick," the sheriff said calmly. "Let's just talk to him first, see what's what." When they arrived at Sam's dilapidated shack, the front door was slightly ajar. A foul stench wafted out from within. "What is that smell? Is that an animal carcass?" Richard's face went white. He couldn't speak, turning away from the door, gagging. "A body! It's Sam!" Inside the house, lying on a rotting wooden cot, was the body of a man wrapped in a burial shroud. It was Sam. Underneath the cot were the remnants of a ritual, wilted flowers, incense ash, and various other dried herbs and objects. The townspeople could easily recognize the decomposing body as Sam's, but the stench wasn't just coming from his corpse. There was another body, its shroud tattered and caked with soil from a grave. Its skin was putrefied, emitting an overwhelming odor. It was Linda's body. "Sam dug up Linda's grave," Richard whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. Sheriff Brody, feeling the weight of his responsibility, examined the scene. Near Sam's body was a wooden cup, which likely once held the poison that ended his life. But what truly made the sheriff's blood run cold was something scrawled on the wall above the bodies. written in what looked like dried blood. I swear this oath on Linda's grave. If I cannot have justice in this life, I will take it in the next. The blood that betrayed her will pay. They who were responsible for her suffering must die. They must know the pain they have caused. Anyone who stands in my way will suffer the same fate. Richard read the words, and his face contorted in a mask of terror. Sheriff Brody asked him what Sam had meant, why he had wanted to sell the family home. Richard mumbled something about Linda's illness, but his evasive look told the sheriff there was more to the story. The question on everyone's mind was chilling. If Sam had been dead for this long, then who or what had been standing in front of Richard's and his siblings' houses every night? After the discovery of Sam and Linda's bodies, the story of Sam's apparition became the talk of the town. Meanwhile, Richard was often seen at Sarah's house, the old Blackwood mansion. Their faces were etched with anxiety, and they grew more withdrawn from the community. "It's because of you we have to do this," Sarah hissed at her brother, her voice filled with frustration. "Me? I was just continuing what Dad started. You knew the consequences if we stopped." Richard shot back, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah began to cry, her shoulders shaking. How could she explain any of this to her husband? She was terrified. The oath written on Sam's wall echoed in her mind. Suddenly, the phone rang, shattering the tense silence. Sarah wiped her eyes and answered it. "Hello?" "Sarah, it's Ellie." It was her younger sister, Eleanor Jr., who lived in Charleston. She was one of the other Blackwood children who had inherited the family fortune, but her voice was strained, almost a whisper. "Ellie? What's wrong? You sound scared." "He's here. Sam is here." "So, what? Ellie, what are you talking about? Hasn't anyone told you? Sam is dead." "Dead? But he's right here, Sarah, in my living room." The kids let him in. Hearing this, Richard snatched the phone from Sarah. "Ellie, that's not him. Get him out of the house." Signy. "But Rick, if it's not Sam, how does he know?" "Know what?" He asked who put Linda's picture and hair in Dad's old urn. Ellie stammered, her eyes fixed on the living room, where the figure of Sam was sitting, staring at her with a pale, empty face. Richard swallowed hard. "Ellie, what should I say?" he whispered to Sarah, his face ashen. Sarah was just as terrified. Richard slammed his trembling hand down on the phone cradle, disconnecting the call. The phone immediately rang again. Sarah moved to answer it, but Richard stopped her. Don't answer it." "But Rick, that's Ellie." "I said don't answer it," he yelled, and Sarah, frightened, let the phone ring. Richard grabbed his keys and sped off on his motorcycle, leaving Sarah's house in a cloud of dust. Back in Charleston, Ellie hurried to her living room and saw the figure of Sam sitting with her 2 elementary school-age children. She quickly grabbed her kids, pulling them away. "Mom, what's wrong?" her children asked. Get out of my house," Ellie screamed, pointing at the figure that looked like Sam. "Why, Mom, we were just having fun with Uncle Sam." Ellie ignored her children's protests and continued to scream at the figure. The apparition smiled, a grotesque, horrifying grin that chilled Ellie to the bone. "We'll play again later tonight, kids. 6-3 cent." Hearing those words, Ellie shoved her children toward their rooms. When she turned back, the figure of Sam was gone. A wave of terror washed over her. She frantically called her husband, begging him to come home immediately. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. Her husband tried to calm her, but the feeling of dread was overwhelming. She decided to sleep in her children's room to be near them. As she quietly opened their door, she was met with a horrific sight. Hanging from the ceiling, directly above the bed where her children were sleeping, was a shrouded figure with a decaying face staring down at them. It was a Pocong, a corpse wrapped in its burial shroud. Ellie collapsed, paralyzed with fear, as the creature drooled a thick, dark liquid onto her children, who began to whimper and toss in their sleep as if in agony. No, please." Ellie was terrified, but a mother's instinct forced her to act. "Honey, help me," she screamed, causing the shrouded figure to turn its head toward her. Ellie recognized the face. It was the face of the man who had taken his own life beside the exhumed corpse of his wife. The body of the brother who had shared a womb with her. The face in the shroud was her own brother, Sam. He had returned with a vengeance. "No, it can't be. You're dead," Sarah would scream, waking up from the same nightmare every night. Her husband, Art, would try to comfort her, asking what she had dreamed. saw Sam, Art. He was watching us from outside, just like he used to before he died, staring at us from across the street. Art was worried by his wife's recurring dream. In their culture, dreams were often seen as omens, but he didn't want to alarm her further, telling her it was just her anxiety. That night felt endless for Sarah. She woke up with swollen eyes and found her high school-aged son, Dari, trying to comfort her. To distract herself, she threw herself into her daily chores, but as she glanced out the window, she saw something strange across the street. It wasn't Sam, not like in her dreams. It was Ellie, her sister, standing there with her 2 children. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant and sorrowful. He returned with a vengeance. "Go away, go away." Ellie's voice from her memory screamed in her head, but the figures didn't move. Instead, the shrouded corpse turned its head, revealing a face she knew all too well. When Ellie recognized it was truly her brother, Sam, her face was consumed by terror. She knew he harbored a deep grudge. The face of the shrouded Sam twisted into a vicious snarl, a look of pure hatred directed at her. It then looked back down at her 2 children, who were sleeping fitfully in their bed, and let a thick, black fluid drip from its mouth and every orifice on its face. Ellie forced herself to move, to rush to her children, but with a thud, the shrouded figure dropped from the ceiling, landing on top of them before vanishing completely. Ellie frantically searched the room, but the entity was gone. "Wake up, sweeties, wake up," she cried, shaking her children. But something was wrong. There was no black fluid on them, but after the incident, their skin turned a sickly yellow, and small boils began to appear all over their bodies. They tossed and turned in agony, but couldn't open their eyes. Later that night, her husband found her in the same condition as their children. He saw Sam standing over her bed. This was the end. He knew that he and his family would die tonight. He grabbed a piece of paper and scribbled something down with a look of utter despair. The note was later found on his nightstand. His body slumped over it, staring at the bedroom where his family had perished. In that room was a large antique armoire, a piece of furniture that had been in the Blackwood family for generations. He had entered the secret space behind it with his siblings before. Suddenly, the phone rang, startling Sarah. "Ring, ring, ring." "Hello?" Dari, her son, answered. He learned that his uncle, Joe, was on the line. Joe was Richard's younger brother. "What? Ellie is dead?" Dari said, his face a mixture of confusion and shock. Hearing this, Sarah's face went pale. She rushed to the phone, snatching it from her son. All of them? Her husband and the kids too? Just the night before, she had seen her sister staring at the house from across the street with her children. At the time, she had quickly closed the curtains, but the image of their ghostly figures was burned into her memory. Now she knew it wasn't just a vision. It was an omen, a warning. At the funeral, the faces of the remaining siblings were grim. They were mourning the loss of their sister, but there was also a palpable fear of the unnatural events plaguing them. "Rick, this has to be Sam's doing," Sarah whispered to her eldest brother. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "But it's true. We all saw it." And Ellie's phone call the day before, Richard couldn't accept anything outside of rational explanation. He insisted his sister's family had died from a sudden, aggressive illness. Nearby, Joe overheard their conversation. He too was beginning to believe the impossible. "It's pointless to be afraid of a dead man," Richard said dismissively, walking away. Sarah turned to Joe, whom she considered wiser than Richard. Filled with anxiety, she told him what had happened. "Ellie called me before she died. She said Sam was in her house." "That's impossible, Sarah. Sam is dead." "We thought so too. But Ellie's kids heard what he said. How did he know about the urn?" Hearing this, Joe felt a chill run down his spine. The story from Dari about what Ellie had said on the phone suddenly seemed terrifyingly real. "And last night," Sarah continued, her voice trembling, "I saw Ellie across the street. She was staring at our house, her face so pale. When I went to get Art, she and the kids were gone." Joe let out a long sigh. "You might be right, Sarah. Something isn't right here." After the funeral, they decided to talk before heading back to their respective cities. That's when Joe showed them a crumpled note found at Ellie's house. "We did a terrible thing. He's back. He's back to take revenge for what we did to her." They recognized the handwriting. It was Ellie's. The next day, A car with out-of-state plates pulled up to the old Blackwood mansion. Out stepped an old man in eccentric clothing, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and with hands covered in rings made of strange stones. He was accompanied by two younger men. They were practitioners of folk magic, summoned by Richard. Inside, Richard, Sarah, Joe, and their other two siblings, Catherine and Margaret, were waiting. "Why did it have to come to this, Rick?" Catherine asked. "I told you I wanted no part of this," Margaret added. Catherine and Margaret were the humblest of the Blackwood children. Catherine ran a small grocery store with her husband, while Margaret was a school teacher married to a postal worker. "It's too late for that now," Richard retorted. "All we can do is find a way to deal with this." "But do we really need to hire a root doctor for this? Can't we just apologize to Sam? Leave an offering at his grave?" Joe argued. "You're a fool, Joe. If someone murdered your wife, would you forgive them for a bouquet of flowers?" Joe and the others fell silent. It was clear that among them all, Richard was the most terrified. Richard Arthur Blackwood. The old man emerged from a room that had been hidden behind a large wooden bookshelf. It was an old, dusty room filled with strange antiques. In the center was a large ceramic urn, and a massive mirror framed with carved snakes dominated one wall. "Yes, sir. That's me," Richard replied respectfully. "You all know what your parents were hiding, don't you?" the man who called himself Silas asked. Richard glanced at his siblings before answering. "We have some idea, sir, but we didn't know there was anything else our father or mother left behind." Silas stroked his long white beard and stepped closer. "You performed the ritual, didn't you? Just as your father instructed." Richard hesitated but finally nodded. "Yes, sir, sin." Silas shook his head. "You should have just continued what your parents started," he said, lamenting their actions. The five siblings lowered their heads in shame, though Richard still seemed unrepentant. "But you can help us, can't you, sir?" Silas set down his coffee cup and chuckled. "Don't make me laugh. Don't call on Silas Croft if you can't handle something like this. Rest assured, your payment will not be in vain." Their faces showed a glimmer of relief. That night, under Silas's direction, a ritual was performed. Richard and his siblings were each given a small pouch filled with salt, herbs, and other objects. "Place this in your bedroom, either under your bed or beside it. Burn this incense until it's gone completely. The spirit will come tonight, but my wards will protect you." Catherine was hesitant, but the fear of what happened to Ellie and her family was stronger. That night, they all knew that the town's night watch had seen something strange, something that confirmed their worst fears. One of the men on patrol had stopped at the church to use the restroom while the others waited outside. The night air was unnaturally cold. Suddenly, the church door opened, and a figure emerged. At first, the men thought it was their friend, but as they turned, their faces went pale. Walking out of the church was a figure they recognized all too well. Sam Blackwood. He walked right past them, even pausing to give a polite nod before continuing on his way. The two men were frozen, speechless, until their friend came out and snapped them out of their trance. He didn't believe their story, but a few moments later, they all saw something that nearly made their legs give out. Floating from the direction of the cemetery towards the town was a shrouded figure, a Pokon. It was unmistakable. From its decaying face, they could tell it was Sam. Overcome with terror, they broke into a run, fleeing into the night. Meanwhile, in the homes of the Blackwood children, they had all followed Silas's instructions. The protective pouches were in place, and the incense had burned down to ash. Just as the clock struck midnight, it began. The same thing happened at each of their houses. A sharp knocking at the door. Knock, knock, knock. The sound repeated, over and over. They knew it wasn't normal and tried to ignore it, but the knocking persisted, a deliberate torment. Catherine, unable to bear it any longer, decided to confront her fear. She left her bedroom to peek out the window and see who was there, but she stopped dead in her tracks. She stumbled backward as a shadowy form materialized in front of her, blocking her path as if forbidding her from going any further. "Don't go, don't go," a voice whispered from the shadow. But just as quickly as it appeared, the shadow vanished, as if sucked into nothingness. The knocking stopped. Catherine waited a few moments, and when the sound didn't return, she crept toward the front door and peered through the window. She instantly regretted it. Her breath caught in her throat, her body turning ice cold. Standing on her porch, waiting patiently, was a shrouded figure. Its face was contorted in rage, ready to unleash its vengeance. She scrambled back to her room, checking the protective pouch Silas had given her. She was relieved to see it was still there. She concluded that the shadow that had blocked her path must have been one of Silas's wards, protecting her. The rest of the night was an agonizingly long wait for sunrise, spent in fervent prayer. The next morning, the siblings called each other, each recounting the same terrifying experience, the knocking at the door, and the sight of the shrouded Sam on their porch, unable to enter. Richard felt a surge of confidence. The man he hired was the real deal. He decided to go see Silas to ask about the results of the ritual. But before he could gather the others, Richard and Joe met on the street and saw a crowd gathering. A man, out of breath and pale as a sheet, was trying to tell a story. "The cemetery, at the cemetery," he panted. "What's at the cemetery?" "There are bodies at the cemetery." A murmur went through the crowd. "Don't joke about something like that." "I'm not lying," the man insisted, taking a deep breath. "I saw them myself. 3 bodies right by the main gate." Hearing this, Richard and Joe rushed to the cemetery. What they found was exactly as the man described. It was Silas Croft and his 2 assistants. They were dead, their bodies horrifically mutilated. Their skin was blackened, and blood had seeped from every orifice. No one dared to touch the corpses. Seeing this, Richard's face turned deathly pale. He had seen the shrouded Sam with his own eyes the night before. Now, he saw that even a powerful man like Silas Croft couldn't protect them. That morning, the town of Blackwood Creek was in an uproar over the discovery of the bodies. Rumors spread like wildfire that Silas had been hired to help with the Blackwood family's troubles. The faces of Richard, Joe, and the other siblings were ashen. They had all seen the entity that was hunting them. "We have to run, Rick. I'm getting out of this town," Joe said, his voice laced with panic. "And go where? Ellie was all the way in Charleston, and look what happened to her. What are we supposed to do? Silas couldn't do anything." And a cold wind blew, making them shiver despite the morning sun, as if unseen eyes were watching them. News of Silas's death reached the other siblings. Their fear intensified. They called Richard, demanding to know what would become of them. "We all saw it, Rick. That thing was really Sam," Sarah cried. For the first time, Richard didn't argue. He had seen his dead brother, and he had seen the shrouded figure that was hunting his family. He asked his siblings to meet one more time at the old family home. "Did you hear? The Blackwood family is being haunted by a shrouded corpse." "Isn't that his own brother, Sam? You don't know the story? There's a rumor that Sam's death is tied to his wife Linda's. They say he'll get revenge for her." The gossip about the shrouded terror targeting the Blackwood family spread throughout the town, especially after Silas, the outsider brought in to help, was found dead. This had a huge impact on them. The townspeople began to keep their distance, and their businesses started to suffer as people grew afraid of the entity that could be lurking anywhere near them. After work, Richard and the others went to Sarah's house. It was already dusk. Margaret and Catherine were already there, waiting anxiously. Joe was supposed to join them, but he called at the last minute to say he couldn't make it. As they approached the old mansion, they noticed it was unusually dark and quiet, though they could see from the window that no one seemed to be home. Sarah, it's us," Richard called out, knocking on the door. There was no answer. The longer they waited, the more unnerved they became, especially as night began to fall. Suddenly, they heard footsteps and saw several townspeople running past the house, their faces pale with fright. "Hey, what's with all the running?" Margaret asked them. "Ma'am, sir, you'd better get out of here," one of them panted. Over there, we saw the shrouded corpse." "Don't be ridiculous," Richard scoffed. "Believe what you want, sir, but you shouldn't be out tonight. We're heading home," the man replied before hurrying on his way. Though he acted dismissive, Richard was shaken. "It's no use. We won't be safe if we go back home either. I'm not leaving until I know Sarah and her son are safe," Margaret declared. They decided to stay, knocking again on the dark, silent house. There was still no answer, but just as they were about to give up, they saw movement inside. A figure walked across the living room. Sarah! Catherine shouted, pounding on the door. They tried to get the person's attention, but as the figure drew closer, they realized it wasn't Sarah. It's Sam," Catherine's face went white. "What? Catherine? What's wrong?" Joe asked, having just arrived. Catherine couldn't speak. She just pointed at the figure inside. They all looked and saw a person walking through the house. But for them, it was an impossible sight. Inside the house was Sam Blackwood. "No, that can't be. Sam is dead," Margaret whispered, refusing to believe her eyes. The figure was unmistakably Sam, their youngest brother. As if sensing their presence, the figure of Sam turned and looked at them through the window. It smiled, a pale, chilling smile that held a sinister promise. He then walked over to the large bookshelf and opened the secret passage behind it. One by one, he brought out items they recognized: the ceremonial urn, the strange herbs, and the hex bags. They knew this was the place their parents had hidden. Then, his form flickered, and for a moment, he transformed into a shrouded figure covered in blood before floating into the secret room. Richard and the others swallowed hard, their blood running cold. "Sarah, oh God, Sarah," Joe whispered, his mind racing to what had happened to Ellie. It was entirely possible the same fate had befallen Sarah. "Open up, Sarah, open the door," they all screamed, pounding on the door, but it remained shut. Joe finally smashed a window with his elbow, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. The house was pitch black. They who had initially wanted to flee were now consumed with worry for their sister. They couldn't just leave her. Sarah, Art, Dari. The only light came from the secret room, a faint, flickering glow. They remembered it was the light from the single oil lamp kept in that room. "Rick? Joe?" A woman's voice called from within. "Sarah, that's Sarah's voice. We have to go in there. She might end up like Ellie if we leave her," Margaret insisted. Richard hesitated. He was the one who had discovered this room months ago, following instructions from his father's will. He never imagined he would be entering it under such terrifying circumstances. A short hallway separated the main house from the hidden room. They followed the flickering light and found themselves in a damp, musty space filled with strange and disturbing artifacts. Dark masks adorned with feathers, buffalo skulls, and wooden idols that became more grotesque the longer you looked at them. And there she was. Sarah was there, smiling at them, while her husband and son lay motionless on the floor nearby. Come in," she beckoned, waving her siblings closer. "Sarah, what happened to them? Let's get out of here. Joe and I will carry them," Richard said. "Come here, brother. Come here," Sarah repeated, her voice eerily calm. Margaret, impatient, started to move toward her, but Joe grabbed her arm, stopping her. Don't go near her," he yelled. Margaret was startled, about to ask why, but she didn't need to. She saw it herself. The look in her sister's eyes was wrong. It wasn't Sarah. Her smile widened into a hideous grin, and she let out a shrill laugh. "I'm your sister, brother. Don't you recognize me?" A wave of terror washed over them. "Sarah, snap out of it," Richard yelled, but he didn't dare get any closer. At that moment, objects in the room began to fly off the shelves. The large urn in the center of the room, without being touched, suddenly crashed to the floor. From the broken pieces spilled a photograph and a small bundle made of cloth, dirt, and a clump of hair. It was a photo of Linda, Sam's wife. They knew what those objects were. A year ago, they had performed a ritual in this very room, offering them to the entity. Sarah's expression, or rather the entity's, shifted from a mocking grin to pure rage. A look of hatred and vengeance was directed at her 4 siblings. "You killed Linda. You sacrificed Linda. You are responsible for her life," Sarah spoke, but the voice was not her own. A foul stench filled the room. Behind her, a shrouded figure with a blackened face materialized. They knew with certainty that the face belonged to their youngest brother, Sam. Amidst their terror, a smaller urn at the far end of the room suddenly fell and shattered. Out of it spilled several more photographs and small, shrouded bundles, identical to the one made for Linda. There were 10 of them in total. They were photos of all of Theodore Blackwood's children. No! Richard screamed when he saw the bundles. It was the same ritual that had been used on Linda. He couldn't bear the thought of the same fate befalling him. His own fear and his instinct to protect his wife and children forced him to flee the horrifying room. A room now inhabited by a shrouded specter not yet satisfied with its revenge. They ran for their lives, leaving the house they had grown up in. As they passed through the front door, The lights inside and around the house began to flicker erratically. They had to leave Sarah behind, but they had to save themselves. Just as they crossed the property line, they looked back. The shrouded figure was now inside the main house, staring at them from behind the window as the lights continued to flash. Their hearts pounded in their chests. They ran, but Joe insisted on stopping at the sheriff's office to report what they had seen. "I'm sorry, folks. We already know what's happening here," Sheriff Brody said with a heavy sigh. "What do you mean, Sheriff?" "We don't want to involve the town in our family's problems," Joe said, ashamed. "It's too late for that. This is my sister. My sister is dead in there," Joe cried out in frustration. The sheriff sighed. He was at a loss. The terror of the shrouded Sam had his town in a stranglehold. "We'll send a team to check the house tomorrow, at sunrise. I won't risk my men in the dark. The whole town is terrified." "See," the sheriff told them that he couldn't offer them protection. At that moment, Joe felt the full weight of his wickedness. Tears streamed down his face as he remembered what he had done. "Forgive me, Sam. Forgive me," he whispered on his way home. When Joe arrived home, the lights were on. He saw his wife and son watching television, laughing. He smiled, grateful that he could still have this moment of happiness with his family. But before he could step inside, he felt a presence behind him. "You're here, aren't you, Sam?" he said, his voice trembling. He knew the answer. The shrouded figure of his brother was standing right behind him. "I know I was wrong, Sam. If you want your revenge, take it out on me. But please, spare my wife and child. Spare my remaining siblings." The shrouded figure behind Joe stared at him with contempt. To the entity, his words were meaningless. His brother wanted forgiveness for his family, but what about them? What about how they had tortured his wife, Linda, until she died a miserable death? The next morning, Blackwood Creek was once again shaken by another death in the Blackwood family. This time, it was at the ancestral home where Sarah and her family lived. At sunrise, Sheriff Brody asked a few brave townsfolk to accompany him to the house. As Joe had described, they found 3 bodies in the secret room, their deaths so gruesome it made them sick. One of the bodies had its head twisted completely backward. The townspeople recognized Sarah. They were horrified, but upon seeing the state of the room, they began to understand what had truly happened. "All right, Joe, tell me everything," the sheriff demanded. Joe was at a loss for words, but he knew there was no point in hiding the truth anymore, not if they were all going to end up like Sarah and Ellie. He walked over to the shattered urn and picked up a photograph from among the shards. He handed it to the sheriff. It was a photo of Linda. "What's this about, Joe?" This room is a cursed place. It's where the sins of the Blackwood family were hidden." The sheriff and the others were still confused. Before they could ask, Joe continued his story. "My father, Theodore Blackwood, was a respected man, but he was also a servant to another power, a dark power hidden in the Shadow Ridge Mountains." The sheriff frowned. "There's nothing in those mountains, Joe, except—" "That's right. My father served the entity of Shadow Ridge." The faces of the townspeople turned pale. The legend of the Shadow Ridge entity was known only to a few. It was said to be a powerful ancient spirit that ruled over an unseen kingdom. Long ago, people would make pacts with it, trading sacrifices for wealth and power. It was a dark, forbidden magic. I don't know why my father made a pact with it. Maybe all of our family's wealth and power came from that entity. Joe explained that the Blackwood children only learned the truth after their father's death, when they found the secret room in his will. The will spoke of his servitude to the entity, and warned that it had to be fed, its desires fulfilled, if his children wished to continue enjoying the family's prosperity. The eldest children who read the will initially wanted nothing to do with it. They felt they were well off enough, but soon after, their fortunes began to turn. Richard's businesses started failing, Margaret's customers disappeared, and nearly all the Blackwood children suffered some misfortune. Then, they were visited by a horrifying apparition, a shrouded corpse in a spectral horse-drawn carriage that would park in front of their homes all night. The shrouded figure in the carriage was the entity that had granted the Blackwood family their fortune. Under immense financial and psychological pressure, the siblings returned to the secret room. There, they were confronted by a shadowy figure that gave them a choice: offer it as sacrifice or lose everything. It was Richard who suggested Linda. He painted her as a sickly woman from a poor family who was a drain on Sam. They hesitated, but the thought of losing their wealth and status was too much to bear. They reasoned that Sam would be better off with a more suitable wife anyway. So, Richard and his siblings planned their ritual. The next time Ellie visited, she brought back a lock of Linda's hair and her photograph. The items were wrapped in a cloth shroud to create a hex bag, which was placed in the urn with other offerings. It was a ritual to offer Linda as a sacrifice to the entity. After the ritual, the Blackwood children's fortunes turned around instantly. It was as if a magical force was making them successful. But from that day on, Linda's health began to decline. No matter what Sam did, she only got worse. Sam never suspected a thing, believing it was just a natural illness, and he cared for her with all his heart. "We never thought Sam would find out what we did. We were so wrong," Joe concluded, his voice choked with guilt. Sheriff Brody and the townspeople listened in stunned silence, horrified by the family's cruelty. "So, it's true. The shrouded figure terrorizing the town is Sam," the sheriff said. Joe nodded. After hearing the whole story, the sheriff knew who to turn to. There was an old wise man in town, a retired pastor named Reverend Miller. He was the only one who might be able to help the remaining Blackwood family. Joe agreed, but when he told his siblings, a fight broke out. "Are you crazy, Joe?" Richard yelled. "You want to tell the whole town our family's secrets? Do you want to die in shame?" "It's not like that, Rick. Now they know our family is involved with the Shadow Ridge entity. They're already looking at us like we're monsters. If we're just looking for someone to help, we can find another practitioner," Catherine argued. Crash! Joe slammed his fist on the table. "Sarah is dead, and this is how you act?" The tension was unbearable. Joe gave up. He left his siblings and went to see Reverend Miller alone, accompanied by the sheriff. As dusk fell, they arrived at Reverend Miller's house, a simple but well-kept wooden home on the outskirts of town. They knocked on the door. Reverend Miller? No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. Disappointed, they were about to leave when a man hurried toward them. "Sorry to keep you waiting. Please, come in." It was Reverend Miller. Despite his age, he was spry and had a kind smile. "I had some business to attend to. My apologies." "How did you know we were here, Reverend?" the sheriff asked, surprised since they hadn't told him they were coming. "He's been waiting for you out front," Reverend Miller said calmly. "Hey?" "Sam, or what's left of him," the Reverend replied. Joe swallowed hard, a cold shiver running down his spine at the thought of the shrouded Sam waiting for him right outside the house. "Please, Reverend, forgive me. My siblings and I, we've done a terrible thing. We sacrificed Sam's wife to the entity my father served," Joe confessed, grabbing the Reverend's hand, half begging. Reverend Miller's expression hardened. "Do you have any idea how grave a sin it is to make a pact with evil?" he thundered. "We were wrong, Reverend. We were so wrong." "We? Who is we?" "The only one here who feels remorse is you. I am only a man. The only one who can help you is God, and that can only happen if you truly repent and ask for his forgiveness." Joe fell silent, thinking of his siblings who had refused to come and were likely seeking another dark practitioner to fight their brother's spirit. "I hope it's not too late," Reverend Miller said, urging them to go find the other Blackwood children. Bang! Before they could leave, the front door of the Reverend's house flew open. The night outside was pitch black, and all the lights in the house suddenly went out. They rushed to the door, but before Joe could get out, it slammed shut again. He tried to open it, but it was stuck fast. An unnatural chill filled the air. He felt something watching him from inside the house. "Reverend Miller?" Joe turned around, and his face went white with terror at what was standing behind him. "Help me!" he screamed. The entity had come for him. It was a shrouded figure, but this one wore the face of an enraged Sam Blackwood. "What you have done is an abomination," Reverend Miller said, his voice firm. "She deserved it. They all deserve it. They took my wife from me," the entity shrieked in Sam's voice. Reverend Miller began to pray, reciting verses from the Bible. The figure of Sam writhed as if in pain. "Show your true form," the Reverend commanded. The figure shrieked, and as the Reverend's prayers seemed to burn it, it called out. Suddenly, dozens of shrouded figures, pokongs, surrounded the house. A spectral carriage appeared, carrying a shrouded figure with a terrifyingly monstrous face. The Reverend did not flinch. He continued to pray, telling the sheriff to join him. "This is our business. You cannot interfere. They made a pact with us. the lead entity hissed. "He has returned to God's path. He is under his protection now," Reverend Miller declared. One by one, the shrouded figures surrounding the house began to smoke and burn. The apparition of Sam started to lose its shape. "So, that's not really Sam?" the sheriff asked. Reverend Miller shook his head. "It's a deception. They took Sam's form to lead the Blackwood children further into darkness, to make them fight evil with evil." Eyes sixth. Suddenly, the front door of the Reverend's house burst open. Joe stumbled out, his face a mask of terror. Behind him was another shrouded figure, this one with the true face of the entity from Shadow Ridge. Reverend Miller intensified his prayers. The entity and its remaining minions, seeing their power wane, retreated into the darkness. Joe was trembling with fear, clinging to the Reverend's arm. "What about my siblings, Reverend? We have to help them." 5-2. Reverend Miller put a reassuring hand on Joe's shoulder. They walked back toward the town. As they got closer, they saw a crowd of townspeople gathered. "The shrouded corpse, it's here," one of them shouted. Joe knew it had come for him, but then the townspeople formed a circle around him, as if to protect him. "Haven't enough people died?" one of them yelled at the figure. "We're not afraid of you anymore. Creatures like you have no power here," another shouted. The people around Joe began to pray together, their voices rising as one. Joe realized they were reciting the Lord's Prayer to drive the entity away. Seeing this, Joe didn't want to remain silent. He slowly began to join in, reciting the words he had long forgotten. At that moment, the true spirit of Sam Blackwood appeared before him. It was not the monstrous figure of vengeance, but a sad, tormented soul. "Your path to revenge is a cursed one, brother," Joe pleaded. "Forgive us, let us go. I will teach them to pray for you, so that God may forgive your sins." The face of Sam's spirit softened. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep sorrow. "I forgive you, but please let them, my remaining siblings, pray for me. Let them atone for what we have all done." Slowly but surely, the spirit of Sam faded away into the night. That was the last night of the terror that had gripped Blackwood Creek. The remaining Blackwood siblings, Richard, Catherine, Margaret, and Joe, survived, but they were forever haunted by their guilt. They sold off their assets and lived quiet lives, dedicating themselves to prayer and atonement for Sam and Linda. The dark secret of the hidden room in the Blackwood mansion remained a chilling legend in the town. Though the terror was over, some locals still claim that on certain nights, if you look at the abandoned Blackwood mansion, you can see a spectral carriage parked out front, the house filled with shrouded figures, still waiting for the souls of the children of Theodore Blackwood. And that's the end of the story. What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening until the very end. May you all be healthy, happy, and successful. I apologize for any mistakes. Until next time, take care.